I'm Big Don Luca, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren.
What is up, guys?
And today we will be getting into the Dallas Mavericks 137-128 overtime victory over the San Antonio Spurs, probably the epitome of chaos game of the Mavericks season, potentially a season-saving game for the Mavericks as they have 12 games remaining. They are now at 500. I believe they are now 8th in the Western Conference. So there have obviously been a lot of different conflicting things that happened in this game when we talk about Christian Wood having a great performance, but of course the San Antonio Spurs were heavily injury depleted. Dwight Powell had a great game attacking the glass and coming up clutch in the pick and roll in this one. But conversely, Maxi Kleber had one of the biggest meltdowns I think that we've seen from an individual player in the NBA all season within the last few possessions of regulation. There's a lot of different things to get into with this one. At the end of the day, the Mavericks came out with a win somehow. Did they deserve it? That remains to be seen. I mean, that's for you to determine, obviously, because in my opinion, they probably don't. But nonetheless, wins are of the utmost importance at this stage in the season, especially given the Mavericks position after dropping those last two to the Grizzlies, and which were probably some of the more deflating games of the season. Jaren, what was your immediate reaction to this game versus the Spurs?
I'm going to stick in the same boat as I was against Memphis, and I still think that this is maybe the worst win of the year. And the reason why is because, again, I know both squads were depleted, but you're playing the San Antonio Spurs squad, who you can argue is full of, or at least half their players are full of G League talent guys. And they're going out there and proving why, they belong in the league. And props to them. I felt like they played a pretty good game. Conversely, the Mavericks, once again, proving how, depleted this roster is of talent and how depleted this roster is of value players outside of Josh Green and Jaden Hardy, and of course Christian Wood. But other than that, I think some guys proved their worth, and others I think proved how depleted / how how talentless this team is.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm just going to run through the full injury report here. The Spurs were without Keita Bates-Diop, Kim Birch, Charles Bassey, Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sohan, and Zach Collins. Malachi Branham, Trey Jones, Romeo Langford, as well as Keldon Johnson were all probable or questionable, but they did end up playing. The Mavericks, of course, were without Tim Hardaway Jr., Markieff Morris, Luka, and Kyrie, of course, and then Christian Wood was questionable, and he ended up playing. So that just shows the depletion of both of these rosters. But, highlight how many guys were out in the Spurs and the Mavericks. Perimeter defensive woes still persisted. And you can make every excuse in the book about the Mavericks top guys being out, but at the end of the day, those aren't even the better, sort of tier of the Mavericks defensive players in this one. So that I thought was honestly the most deflating aspect of all of this. But before we get into this game, of course, here is an ad from our sponsor, Spotify for Podcasters. All right, Jaren. So getting into this one, this was a game that saw no team really have a lead until the Mavericks were able to take it home in overtime and really plant their foot upon that hill down in San Antonio. But otherwise, this was a game that saw both teams change leads a ton of times, and it didn't really seem as if anybody could actually take heed in this one. What did you see from the Mavericks as they opened up the game in this one?
Yeah, conversely, I think it was a Josh Green and very Jaden Hardy first quarter, one where we saw both those guys kind of catch fire. I think offensively, we really saw how much of an identity, or lack of identity, I should say, that this team really has outside of their two star players. it kind of just seems like, guys are really running around trying to get their own offense. It doesn't seem like there's any flow or any connection for that matter throughout this offense. And that's really, I think that was put on a standstill at this first quarter, especially without Tim Hardaway Jr., who's, you can argue one of the better guys identity wise for this team. And, having two young guys with Jaden Hardy and Josh Green having to run your offense. Now, granted, they honestly have played really good, but even still, I think that it looks difficult. It looks kind of disgusting. And that's offensively, I think that kind of sums it up throughout the game for that matter.
Yeah.
Defensively,
or go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was like, defensively, I honestly didn't feel like it was that bad of a performance. I know San Antonio, they were really depleted, especially on the offensive end outside of Doug McBuckets, but really, and Keldon Johnson, I guess. But I felt like, really, at least in that first half, they kind of kept them on a still. I know, what was it, 11 first half turnovers by the Mavericks, I think.
Yeah, and then the Mavericks ended up finishing the game with 18 turnovers. The Spurs ended up only actually finishing with 10. But from the Mavericks perspective, you definitely saw when the ball was in the hands of Josh Green, McKinley Wright IV, and Jaden Hardy, respectively, that they definitely, as the game went on, you could see how that workload and the amount of sets and, offensive plays that they had to process, it caught up to them at certain points. And the Spurs were full court pressing at times during this game. There was a lot of trapping and there was a lot of diagnosing. It was almost a game that you would have loved Kyrie and Luka to be out there just to be able to slow things down. We always talk so much on this podcast about pushing the pace, but this was a game where, you have a young, giddy, ready to go Spurs team that is trapping from every which way essentially, but doing so very erroneously and very erratically. And you would have liked if you could have had somebody down to sort of just slow the tempo up and be able to, diagnose and hit guys in the 4 and 3, because the Mavericks, you could definitely tell it rattled them at times as the game went along. But starting off, I do think that Josh Green and Jaden Hardy put some good pressure on the rim, but we could definitely see that their shot diet just turned a little more laborsome. And especially as the game went on, they just didn't have their legs under them on certain shots. And they obviously started to miss a little bit more, but they were able to come through in the fourth quarter and overtime when it really mattered. But to your point about how the Mavericks played defensively in that first half, I think that they played pretty well, but I do think that they obviously were unfortunately the benefactors of some really good shot making from the Spurs. I mean, they were making some tough shots in that first half. The second half, really until overtime, I do feel as if the Mavericks defense definitely started to lapse a little bit. And some of that shot making from guys like Trey Jones and Malachi Branham in that first half, where they were making some really difficult contested mid-range jump shots and floaters. I think the Mavericks started to get that in their head a little bit, and they started conceding a little more and letting guys blow past them. The Mavericks also definitely played down to the youth of the Spurs in the sense that they were also defensively, really, I think the only remediating factor that they had was Reggie Bullock, who was stout and he was good at his screen navigation in this one. But the Mavericks were doing a lot of over fouling. There were, Christian Wood, for instance, like I said, a lot of illegal screens. There were just a lot of like curable mishaps that, even though the group out there that was young tonight, they're not super young. You would hope that these things would be patched by game 70 in the season.
Yeah, no, for sure. I 100% agree with that statement that you just made. I think that the fact of the matter for me is, at the end of the day, it was a close game. I know again that the Spurs had some guys out, and of course the Mavericks had their top two, arguably three guys out due to injury. But even still, it just kind of lacked an identity, I guess you can say. I feel like, throughout these, you look on the not great teams, but you look at the good teams this year, the Milwaukee Bucks, Brooklyn Nets without, whenever Kevin Durant and Kyrie were both playing for them, you can see how whenever their star players aren't playing, how they still have an identity. And for me, I think that's kind of coaching. I know, we're going to go more into this big picture in the next podcast, but For me, I think that's just, how do you not have an identity within your second unit, third unit? We of course saw most of that, tonight without Luka and Kyrie, but I don't know. Offensively, it looked a little lackluster, to say the least. I don't really know what kind of words you can use for that. I mean, I guess you can say we're thankful that Christian Wood was able to kind of hoist the team on his back at times. I know he had some bad fouls, due to some stupid illegal screens and all the fact of that matter. But even still, I don't know. My big thing is just there was zero identity. Like you said, there was just a bad shot diet through even the two guys that took the most shots with Josh Green and Jaden Hardy. They took eventually bad shots, especially in that third quarter is whenever I started seeing things fall apart. In that fourth quarter, definitely picked up. But yeah, in that second and third quarter is whenever things really took a dip. But yeah, I think I guess I just want to get your thoughts on it. Like, do you feel, I know this is more big picture, but do you feel like there's any sort of identity throughout this team without Kyrie or Luka on the floor? Or like even, offensively or defensively? I know defensively this team has been lost basically since the start of the season, but offensively, did you even have a sense of an identity?
I mean, I do kind of concur with you that it definitely felt sporadic, and they did defer to a lot of ISO ball. It's a lot harder for the Mavericks. They definitely, ran a lot less horn sets, to really furbish that offensive identity that you're alluding to without those guys in, just because they're taking, they have such a high usage rate, both of them. But nonetheless, I mean, I think that I don't know if I would necessarily subject Jason Kidd. I think that, we have another podcast coming out tonight regarding the team and some big picture stuff. And there are some definitely some things that I'm going to go hard in on him with, particularly some of his quotes to the media and things of that nature. But in terms of the lack of identity without Luka and Kyrie out there, I don't know if I would necessarily place that upon him, just given that you're, asking a 22 and 20-year-old to spearhead your offense, one of which is not even necessarily a primary, playmaker or creator. So I think that that's just sort of a personnel problem at the end of the day. I do think, had Christian Wood obviously played more these last few games and maybe over this just stretch since the All-Star break, and had he never got hurt, and or if Jason Kidd obviously, it had deferred to him more in the rotation, they would have been able to run the offense through him even more in this one. I mean, he didn't even start, of course, and he was, of course, riddled by foul trouble. So had that not happened, I think that he could have had an opportunity to even have a bigger game than he ended up finishing with 28 points and 13 rebounds, just from the standpoint that he was against Dominic Barlow and Gorgie Jang, who are fringe NBA centers. Barlow, 19-year-old kid who, he's got some promising upside just from how springy he is, but definitely lacks a certain attention to detail on the defensive end that he'll have to get more discipline in. And, Zhang, obviously, he's getting up there in age, and he's fairly easy to blow past. And, even when the Spurs switched, it felt like whatever, smaller defender was on Christian Wood, even if it was one of their more stout defenders and like a Keldon Johnson or a Romeo Langford, they were kind of at his mercy at times. And, had coaching and foul trouble swung differently, I think that the Mavericks would have had a little bit more of an offensive identity in this one. But nonetheless, I do agree that it oftentimes, especially in this game, felt sporadic, and we didn't necessarily know where the offense was coming from. The Mavericks, with Hardy at the point of attack, they were running a lot of staggers and, down screens with one guy, especially when Maxi or Bertans were in. And then, they would use that screener to rescreen. And Hardy's good at, snaking and being able to sort of sort through all that mess and sift through all that sort of things. But you could definitely see that at times there were just too many bodies flying around for him. And consequentially, he, turned the ball over a few times. The same thing with McKinley Wright. And they kind of did just look lost out there. So I definitely do concur with you that there was some definitely some offensive identity issues in this one.
Yeah, so fast forwarding this one a little bit, I guess just to address the elephant in the room. I know at the top of the podcast, you kind of discussed how Maxi just had a complete kind of meltdown, pretty much on both ends of the floor. So I wanted to kind of dive a little bit into that inbounds pass. I think it was with 1.5 seconds
We
left.
got to backtrack first to what actually happened at first. So I think there was like 3.8 seconds left, and it had just come off Jaden Hardy going 1 of 2 at the foul line. The Mavericks were up 121 to 119, and Keldon Johnson gets the Spurs took a timeout, so they were able to advance the ball. And Keldon Johnson takes the inbound pass. Josh Green is the defender, immediately spin moves on him. He's able to blow past him a little bit. This is a little off topic, I guess, but just in terms of Josh Green's defense over this last stretch since the All-Star break, to just allude to some of the points that we were making earlier about it being, about some things being sporadic offensively, Josh Green's defense has definitely been a lot more reminiscent of the last 2 years over this last little stretch. He has not been, as positionally savvy. He hasn't, been getting down in a stance as much. He hasn't been as stout. He's definitely kind of, steal chasing, over fouling, not using his athletic tools in the way that we would hope. And I mean, I just wanted to highlight that because that was also, I think, a big thing where he was losing a lot of guys at the point of attack in the second half, particularly like anytime he was matched up on, Keldon Johnson or Trey Jones. And I mean, I'm not saying that those guys are negligible by any means, but it's not the sort of star power, and it doesn't carry the sort of aura that the guys he's been going up against in a nightly basis in a loaded Western Conference. And that's got to be patched up before playoff time because, he's become an integral part of this rotation. And we, if that's going to be his is, the first and second year Josh Green, then that puts the Mavericks in even a tougher position defensively. And I think that was some of their downfalls tonight, but nonetheless, like I was saying, Keldon Johnson spin moves, blows past Josh Green. He gets fouled. And I think that, and it's by Maxi, of course. Maxi does a great job going straight up. They go to the replay center, and I think that they end up concluding that Maxi's lower body had enough contact with Keldon Johnson to where they called a foul. So, I mean, it was one of those bang calls, but Maxi, I thought, did a good job of going straight up. I think personally, if Scott Foster's not up in there, it's one that, maybe the Mavericks get away with. But nonetheless, Keldon Johnson ends up missing the first free throw, puts him in a weird position. And he does the whole thing where he's trying to, once he gets the second free throw, he's obviously trying to miss it, just like Luka did earlier with the 60-point game this year against the Knicks, and try to, get his own rebound. But he does the thing where he catches it immediately and then basically launches it directly at the rim to just try to, get it going around the circle, maybe get a back tap with it hits right underneath the front of the rim to where somebody can rebound it. But he does it immediately after getting the, ball from the referee. It's sort of a, that's kind of a typical play that we tend to see where guys try to do that, catch people off guard, but he either barely hits the rim or doesn't hit it at all. It goes out of bounds. And I mean, I think he commits a lane violation, so it doesn't matter anyways. Nonetheless, it's Mavericks ball with 1.8 seconds left. And all the Mavericks have to do is inbound the ball to win without, even surveying anything. I don't know if the Mavericks had any more timeouts left. I don't think they did, because I think they used their last timeout with that challenge. But nonetheless, so they didn't have any timeouts if, the Spurs were pressing them enough to where they need to call one. But Maxi just nonchalantly throws it basically 3/4 court to Christian Wood down on the baseline, and it goes way over his head, and it's out of bounds. And I mean, you would have just liked to at least see him make more of a conscious effort to, find something that is just not as difficult of a pass in that moment. Because yes, Wood was open. He did have a lead, and that was probably the most open guy at the moment, but also probably the most difficult pass to make. And because it didn't touch anybody and it didn't even touch the court, the Spurs are able to take it back, and they're able to get the ball and stay on that side of the half court. And then the Spurs end up switching, I believe, on a down screen. Josh Green and Maxi have to switch on the ensuing play, inbound play. I think the Spurs took a timeout after that. Yeah. And Maxi, he looks as if he switches on to Keldon Johnson at first, but then just, his back is turned to him, and he just lets him get a free lob. I forget, to be honest, who was inbounding it for the Spurs, but they throw a really good pass, and Keldon Johnson dunks it with 1.5 seconds left, and the Mavericks don't have any timeouts. They inbound it, don't get a shot off, and they go to overtime. So, Jaren, what were your thoughts on that just meltdown from Maxi Kleber? I kind of want to take it from a grain of salt because, he hasn't played too terrible since he's come back from injury, but that was just a mental mistake that you cannot have as an NBA player in the waning moments of a pretty, in terms of stakes wise, maybe not in terms of the players involved, because it was, quite literally almost a G League game out there. But in terms of stakes, it's a huge game as the Mavericks are, approaching the end of the regular season here in terms of the ramifications that it entails for playoffs and all that. What do you think happened there with Maxi?
I think it's, to point it to one thing, I don't think you really can do it. Maybe a little disgruntled, discouraged after kind of throwing it straight out of bounds from the other side of the court. I think that might have a tail of it. Also, it is a hard switch to make, especially, coming full send off the down screen. That's kind of what Keldon Johnson did. It was a full bang bang switch play that you have to be prepared for. I don't think the Mavericks.
It was like a literal pin down because it was almost as if they were, running some sort of pick and roll action. He was screening from behind that's not trying to play devil's advocate or anything. Maxi still got to make that play, but it was kind of hard, but at the same time, I know that they weren't, I don't know exactly what their roles assigned. I don't know the ins and outs or intricacies of the Mavericks defense, but you have to imagine, he was the last guy there. He's the last line of defense. There's got to be something to at least not conceding the rim there,
Oh yeah, no. And I think Maxi's the one guy that you should expect to make that play. For him to not make that play, and especially in the fashion in which it happened, where pretty much his whole back was turned to the basket, or turned to Keldon Johnson. I think it was just pretty. I guess it's the sum of all sums in terms of this Mavericks defense, if you want to quote it like that. But this was definitely just one of those meltdowns where I think it kind of just trickled down into event after event kind of led its way into this. The Mavericks shouldn't have been in this situation in the first place, but even still, the fact that you're finding your way into this and now you're having to deal with this, I think that's the one guy you should have to rely upon on at least giving yourself an effort on defense, and that's what we didn't see. And of course, Reggie Bullock pretty much runs with the ball and just kind of hoists up a shot with 2 seconds after the buzzer rings. So that pretty much just sums up the game. But
do you think that this holds any stake in terms of, because I know there's some discourse on Twitter that's been pretty harsh at Maxi, but are you taking too much credence to this little sequence of events, or are you kind of just going to write it off as a big mental brain fart?
Look, I'm going to write it off as a brain fart or whatever you want to call it. But I think Maxi is definitely a capable guy. He's proven time and time again why he's the best defender, or at least a top 2 defender on this team. We're, very depleted of defense as of lately, and having him back is still as amazing as, having Luka or Kyrie come back. But even still, this is a mistake that, you can't just erase from your mind. You have to keep it there, learn from it. You're going to see plenty more of it, especially with the playoffs coming up. But this is a key role player, a key guy that, you kind of need in your rotation. And if you are kind of taking notes and, keeping a mental note, whatever, I don't think you can, yes, like I said, don't erase this from your mind, but you can't just hold on to this one forever. This is a one-off scenario, I feel like, in terms of his books. We've seen him sort of knock these out plenty of times beforehand. He's been the main culprit and kind of breaking up game-winning plays. He does that. So I'm not going to count that as, anything that revolved from this season, or, him mentally, being not locked in, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to tally it as that. I think, yes, it was a brain fart. Yes, it sucks that it was in this moment and it was in such an important game, but of course the Mavericks ended up pulling it out. So it made it at least a little bit better.
Yeah, no, for sure. And speaking of the Mavericks pulling it out, Jaren, how were the Mavericks able to ready the storm in that overtime period? They obviously sort of rode the coattails of Christian Wood and Dwight Powell throughout much of the fourth quarter, particularly, Christian Wood early on that fourth quarter. And once he got in foul trouble by virtue of like 3 illegal screens set in a row, Dwight Powell, just his hustle, his energy, getting those offensive rebounds, being that outlet to really having some good hands at times to receive some, fairly difficult passes out of double teams from Josh Green and Jaden Hardy that they were getting Dwight Powell to. And I mean, to his credit, even against a very weak and brittle Spurs front line, he did a good job of, catching and diagnosing his surroundings, operating, in some scenarios as the outlet passer in the 4-on-3. And, sometimes he was doing a really good job at just going up and finishing. So they sort of rode the coattails of that down the stretch. How were they able to pull this one home after a very sort of weird emotional sequence there at the end of the fourth quarter?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was just me, but I felt like overtime was kind of a completely different game. I don't know why the Mavericks looked a lot more confident. They were running a lot more schemes. Defensively, they looked pretty good. I don't know if it was just, a mix of the Spurs kind of taking bad shots and running into, bad lanes, taking stupid shots. Like I said, I don't know if it was a mix of that and kind of getting lucky or what it was, but I felt like the Mavericks, offensively really picked it up. They're running some schemes between, Jaden Hardy and Christian Wood that I thought really worked. One thing, I don't know if it's going to get mentioned a lot, but I felt like Hardy honestly ran the offense really well. At times, it kind of, was almost like chickens running around with their heads cut off, and he was the one able to, grab the ball and sort of just dribble off and, kill off a few seconds, wait for everybody to get set again, and then, run some schemes. And, Christian Wood was really the main benefactor of those moments. But even Reggie Bullock, I think he had a 3 in overtime.
He had 2.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, so Reggie Bullock, Josh Green as well. I think like these guys were really main benefactors of kind of slowing down the offense, getting things run. There was a lot of corner threes, which is obviously the shortest 3-point shot you can take. There was a lot of those being taken. I just think that the offense was really run smoothly. At times, at least. I know that there's definitely moments where it just kind of looked like both teams were just running around kind of chasing after the ball, but definitely whenever it was cut down to smoothness, I think Jaden Hardy was really the main culprit of that, and really the main culprit of why I think we scored 17 points in that overtime period, which is pretty infrequent, or it doesn't happen a whole lot.
Yeah, no, I thought the Mavericks did a lot better job of getting the ball to the middle of the floor in that overtime period. We saw in a lot of those down screens where, the Mavericks would then redirect into a stagger or something like that. Hardy was just being able to sift through that mess a little bit better. And I definitely think he settled down a little bit. And, as Christian Wood alluded to on Twitter today, as well as in his Bally Sports Southwest post-game interview, they definitely looked a lot more poised down the stretch there. And I mean, they were able to bring it home, and it just looked like a stark contrast compared to the first 4 quarters, where they were just as erratic as the injury-riddled, young Spurs team. So they started to, Christian Wood got a few face-ups, and, they used him as the outlet in the short roll one time. One of my favorite plays of the night actually is when I think Christian Wood was the outlet in the short roll, and then the Spurs sent another double at him, and Dwight Powell slipped and rolled, and they had a little big to big lob. So it just looked a lot more savvy and complete down the stretch. And I mean, to those guys' credits, specifically Hardy and Wood, you can kind of probably accredit some of those erroneous plays and some of that sort of offensive, just junk that they had to kind of sift through to them not really getting heavy minutes, especially throughout this, last 10 to 20 game stretch. So you have to be out there and get real game reps. Practice can only do so much, of course. So it was good that they were able to sift through that, and they were able to bring it home down the stretch. They pulled through pretty decisively. It also looked as if the defensive intensity, definitely the ante was up there in overtime. Even like Josh Green, for instance, I thought he did a better job of just staying home on guys, and the Mavericks were getting hands up at the rim. The help defense was a little bit better. And, as much as we like to knock the guy, and this is a lineup that we've been skeptical of, Dwight Powell in tandem with Christian Wood does allow for good offensive spacing, with the ability for, and especially in, I don't know with Kyrie and Luka back, but with their, with them not being included, it allows for Christian Wood to be able to, face up and spread the floor a little bit more and then use Dwight Powell as a roller. And then on the other side of things, Christian Wood can kind of freelance guard some guards. And I mean, obviously Dwight Powell is not necessarily the guy that you want at the backline defense or, defending even rudimentary pick and rolls for that matter. But against a fairly depleted Spurs front line, I think it made his job a lot easier in that department. And he had some pretty solid, stops down the stretch. So where he even, had to switch on like Keldon Johnson at one time. So by virtue of that, the Mavericks were able to bring it home. Do you have any other thoughts on this probably, weird, hokey game that was a terrible win, but also saw 5 Mavericks scoring 20 plus points for the first time all season? And I don't even know how much that's happened this time. I don't even know how much that's happened in the NBA this year. So, I mean, do you have any more thoughts on the game just in general?
I mean, I don't know if you want to discuss this now or later tonight in the different podcast, but can we get at least a little bit of discussion around Jaden Hardy and whether or not he should be having a role in this team? Because I mean,
yeah, we'll get to that when we go through the players individually and everything like that. So let's go ahead and segue into that. Actually, I guess we can go ahead and start with Jaden Hardy for that matter. I think that we've kind of talked about, how he had to take lead as the main sole proprietor of the offense at times in this game. And, there were times where you saw just the extreme talent and the potential there. And conversely, like we saw a lot, like I alluded to, a lot of the schematics of everything sort of catching up to him at times. What did you think of how he played just overarchingly in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like overarchingly, I thought that he had a really good game. Not crazy efficient game, but I mean, again, he's 20 years old. We're not going to see these crazy, super efficient games probably until a few years down the line. But the way that I think he controlled, especially in overtime, the way he controlled the offense, I think just has key attributes of being a leader, at least a future leader.
And I mean, for a rookie guy like that, also, I hate to interrupt you, but he went 9 for 10 on the free throw line tonight, and he was getting. There were a lot of no calls that I think that he just hasn't been getting, just due to some sort of lack of respect from the referees, just being a younger guy. And I think what I was most impressed by was his ability to, still have a very marginal and effective impact on the game, despite having a very inefficient shooting night and things of that nature. And, having some woes in terms of being able to diagnose what the defense was giving him and everything like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another big thing is his shot diet. I know at times it did look a little kind of meh, but also through majority of that game, I mean, a lot of his shots were at the rim. I know, not crazy efficient, but again, as you alluded to a second ago, where he's just not getting as many calls as, guys like Luka or Kyrie, for instance. He's not going to get those kind of calls. He's going to have to sort of, throw his head down and get on the foul line. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw him nail down 9 for 10 from the free throw line. And he nailed some huge free throws in this game. I know he missed one that probably would have put the game away. But as we mentioned, I mean, he's a young guy. He's a rookie. We shouldn't expect him to do these kind of things for this team. And he's having to do these kind of things for this team. It's definitely something that we want to see. But we shouldn't have to see it. And that's exactly what we're having to see for this team to win. I think, as you mentioned, offensively, his ability to kind of just snake down low, really sort of shade off screens and shade off double teams, even, switches for that matter, is sort of just in tangent with, his ability to get to the rim. He has an uncanny ability to almost Kyrie-esque in a sense, like definitely not as a rhythmic or artistic in that fashion, but he can get to the rim at the same fashion in which Kyrie can, just a sheer ability of just getting to the rim however which he wants it to. That's kind of what we saw at times, and especially throughout the season. But Also, I want to say he hit a few mid-range shots. I don't know if any of them nailed in, but they did look clean.
Yeah.
Sort of like off of, dribble offs and, kind of catch and shoot, mid-range shots. It looked pretty. I know again that they mostly didn't fall in, but still it looked pretty. I think it's only a matter of time. I mean, I think that pretty much covers it in terms of Hardy. Do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just like when you were talking about the finishing, I think that there's a lot of times he can get to the rim really early and, easy on at the beginning of the game. But once the defense, starts to bring a second defender over, he just got to, it's just a learning process for him in terms of, being able to diagnose that and start maybe taking a little more of those mid-range jump shots and, some more threes when guys go under on a pick and roll on him, things of that nature. I thought defensively he played pretty decent there, in the same sort of boat that Josh Green was in. I thought that he did definitely kind of fall victim to a lot of those plays where he oftentimes, more so with him than Green would just lose guys on rotations. And you could tell that heavy dosage of minutes definitely came with a lot more defensive woes. He did a good job like one-on-one individually, but there were some times where he kind of, preemptively closed out on guys or missed a rotation and was just being a little too handsy. But nonetheless, I thought he gave good effort, and it's not something that I expect, either of those offensive or defensive woes to be just automatically mended for a rookie guy. He's in a learning process. Sure, he may have to play a very high dosage of minutes in a game like this, contrary to what he'd usually have to play. But other than that, I mean, you can't expect a ton from a guy given his position. So, I mean, just basically going off that, you obviously brought up the question earlier. Do you think that he should be getting more consistent minutes in this rotation?
Yeah, I mean, especially what we've seen the last 3 games, I think it's a question that you have to ask, or at least have to mention, or acknowledge. But this is one, I mean, it's a tough question to answer just because it kind of depends on what you want to see from your team. I don't think he's going to work in tandem with Kyrie as much, or, even at times we've seen him, if he's working with just Luka, he's been really effective. But I would be surprised, or I wouldn't be surprised to see him in a role with, maybe a Christian Wood role where, it's just maybe Luka, Hardy and Christian Wood, some lineup like that where, offense is of a premium. But definitely if you're in need of offense, and we've been saying this for a long time, but if you're in need of offense, definitely throw him out there. Now the question of is he warranted a role on this team? I mean, you kind of have to look like what guys really have roles. Justin Holiday, his role's kind of depleting. All these guys like fringe level. Frank Ntilikina, he didn't even play tonight. I mean, McKinley Wright, he's got a jolt of playing time. Like, there's guys like this where they're fringe rotational players, and you also have to include Hardy in there who can make it out of that. Right now, I think the best case is probably Hardy. I think for that sort of last rotational spot, he definitely gives you, as I mentioned, jolt of offense. Defense, you're losing that for sure, but I think that there's a role for this guy, especially, in need of this last, 2 weeks of basketball where this team just kind of looks like they've fallen off a cliff. I think he's the guy that's definitely shined bright, and it doesn't get talked about enough, honestly.
Yeah, I do think that there's some sort of redundancy because I know a lot of fans will just point to the fact that, he scored so much in these last 3 games and how is this guy not playing? This isn't like, I think this is dissimilar to the Christian Wood situation, just given his role, us already having Kyrie and Luka. When they come back, I mean, I think that he is probably warranted himself to get, consistent maybe 10 to 15 minutes. But, in some of these higher stakes games, those rookie mistakes tend to add up. And, he's been playing great, but he's also, like I said, been essentially the sole proprietor of all the offensive creation and playmaking duties. So can we expect him to carry that burden or thrive in a lesser role where, he's going to be playing a little bit more off ball? He can certainly do that, and he can, certainly spot up, but, this mistakes will definitely be amplified as we work down the stretch here. I think that, it's really either him or McKinley Wright. McKinley Wright has been doing a really good job, playmaking and defensively. And I think he's a little more controlled than Hardy is, despite, some of those turnovers that he had tonight, which he had a couple just terrible ones. So I think just kind of game dependent. If you really do need that interjection of offense, just go to Hardy, maybe see what he has. But if you want just maybe another playmaker out there, somebody to kind of, just push the pace and, run your offense a little bit. If, there's any time where you have non-Kyrie and non-Luka minutes together, or you just need another creator out there, maybe go Wright's direction. But I would say it's kind of game dependent for me specifically. But I don't know. I think that conversely, like he's played, he scored so much these last few games that, you just got to give the kid a shot somewhere, even when Kyrie and Luka get back, even if it's just 10 to 15 minutes a game. So I guess that's kind of where I end up lying on that. But as we move forward into how some others played tonight, what did you think of Josh Green? Because I thought that, I think that we've kind of talked more than enough, me specifically, just kind of about his defensive performance tonight. But offensively, what did you make of his game tonight, Jaren?
Yeah, offensively, I felt more so in the first half. He was kind of more as a facilitator, or being used as a facilitator. I think it definitely, his playmaking aspect dipped off in the second half. I just don't think he was really used as much, or the offense really just ran through him as much as it did in the first half. But even still, he was able to find ways to get involved. That's something that, over the last few weeks, I feel like we've seen less and less of, is Josh Green getting involved. And I think it's just kind of flipped since, of course, Luka and Kyrie have been out of the lineup. But he was able to get involved nonetheless. He was able to have 21 points and a huge impact on this one offensively, where he went a pretty good 50% from the field, and one where it kind of looked like any shot he was putting up, it was falling in at one point in time. He had some really timely threes in that overtime period, and especially in the fourth quarter where the Mavericks, regained the lead after not having it for a little bit. But yeah, I think, conversely, he's proven to be a legit player. We all knew this, especially, with his emergence this season, but he's proven to be a legit, backcourt kind of guy. I know that, you don't want to be relying on those, and we're having to right now, but even still, I think that he's facilitated the offense enough to kind of at least ask some questions as to, what's the full potential of this guy. But I think that we saw just a really savvy offensive game, one where we saw him, have his usual, standing in the right corner at the right time, and also having his usual, coming off dribbles, coming off of closeouts, and picking off of those, and just getting downhill really quickly. Like, we saw a mix of everything in that aspect. We even saw him get into his bag a little bit, and I can't remember if he made the shot, but he had like a turnaround jumper, and it kind of looked pretty clean. I think he missed it actually, but it looked clean, something that we don't usually get to see out of him with the ball in his hands. But nonetheless, I think that it was offensively a pretty sound Josh Green game. Even defensively, I think it was one of his better ones as of recently, because he has definitely, fallen off. Saying, better recently is still not that good, but I felt like it was more of a identity game for him than anything. And I think that he, at least offensively, nailed it out of the park.
Yeah, I thought he did a really good job of pacing. You're pushing the pace, particularly in the half court. He's a guy that can blow by you at a moment's notice. If he just, waves off the screen and goes to the other side, it can catch anybody defending him off guard. He does a really good job of that. His bag is also, is obviously ever developing, and, you can kind of see him get caught up doing too much sometimes. But he did do a good job facilitating in that first half, making those wraparound passes to Powell in the paint. Did a decent job in the pick and roll. He didn't look all too terrible, but you can definitely tell that the role that the Mavericks relegate him to having when, Kyrie and Luka are out there is a lot more, effective per his skill set, if that makes any sense. The ability to run him off curl outs, or run off curl outs, as well as, get him in transition, running, as a shooter a little bit more. When he's relegated to having, to do this point of attack offensive creation, it can definitely pay dividends at times because he's able to just kind of catch guys off guard. But you also, we saw he doesn't have a lot of fail-safe measures when maybe his first sort of option doesn't work out on a dribble drive. We can see him get caught up sometimes. And we definitely saw that come back to bite him in that second half where he definitely waned off his production a little bit. But nonetheless, I mean, without Luka and Kyrie, it was still impressive that he was able to fill up the box score in the manner in which he did and still have a very efficient night. So I thought he played pretty well. What did you think of Dwight Powell's game, Jaren? Because I think I talked about the hustle and the pick and roll aspect, particularly in that fourth quarter. But I just want to see if you had any other thoughts on that.
I mean, honestly, I don't really have, anything too much to add. I think that, we definitely take him for granted at times whenever you're asking the question, Wood or Powell. We're quickly to sweep him under the rug, but he's a feasible NBA talent guy. I think that, sometimes, we bash him too hard and, we don't give him enough credit. And this is one where he kind of proves, why he's still on this team and why, he's looked at as, I hate saying this, but he's looked at as an option sometimes. He finished with, not career numbers or anything, but 100% from the field. He didn't miss a shot. Granted, all at the rim, but that's pretty much all he could do. So, I don't know. He had some weird moments in this one where he just I felt like if he just went straight up with the ball, it probably would have gotten the foul and the basket, but he kind of flailed way too much. And
he does that sometimes, and that ends up to him missing a lot of layups. But
yeah,
at the end of the day, his hustle and the energy he provides is invaluable. He was winning a lot of 50-50 balls tonight, and just attacking the passes that he was getting and, having good hands, things of that nature. I'm not going to say that this was his most effective game ever, just due to the fact that it was against a very thin Spurs front line that, was playing guys that potentially you could argue are probably not NBA centers. I think that those are pretty strong arguments there. But nonetheless, it was interesting to see him looking like the biggest guy out there, having to play against, Mamu Kashvili, as well as, Barlow and Gorgie Zhang. He actually, size-wise, was actually the biggest guy out there between most of those guys. And it definitely paid dividends at times, just his rebounding, him staying savvy in the pick and roll. And, that Spurs defense, if we're going to just, I guess, knock Dwight a little further, despite his good game, they're also very preemptive and they do kind of fail and flail in their pick and roll coverages a lot. And there were some times that they just, I don't know if this was a coaching decision by Pop, just trying to get them more experience or what, but there were just some very inopportune doubles in scenarios that it made it very easy for Dwight to kind of just catch and go up. But nonetheless, he really did hone down the paint in this one in a game where the Mavericks sorely needed to attack the rim. And, that is truly invaluable where they actually, needed every single one of his 22 points in this one. So another guy that I thought did a really good job of, honing down and anchoring the paint as well as stretching the floor a little bit was Christian Wood. How do you think that he played in this one, Jaren?
Yeah, Christian Wood, I definitely proved his worth, to say the least. Kind of being the culprit of his own offense at times, and even, slowing up the offense, but in a good way. Whenever it needs slowing or whenever it need controlling, he would control it at times, especially in that overtime period. He did a really good job of him, and Hardy did a really good job of just kind of, I guess, facilitating the ball, but not facilitating the ball, just maintaining offense. I felt like he was really, one of the guys that led us to the victory. It was him and, two other guys really. But I felt like Christian Wood, this is more of a Christian Wood type game, one where he doesn't do anything crazy, but he proves that, he's on the court for a reason. He had 28 points off the bench in this one. And again, this is a depleted Spurs, especially center rotation, but he was able to take full advantage of that. We've seen him have troubles with the Spurs big men in the past. Granted, it was Jakob Poeltl in the lineup, but even still, we saw him take advantage of this. And this was one where, we kind of needed him to, and he came up huge in this one. I know he picked up some really bad offensive fouls early in the game, and really kind of just inhibited him to play most of that third and fourth quarter. But whenever we needed him most, he came out and played. And I think he had 5 fouls bet in the game, but pretty much stuck it out through the whole entire overtime period without picking up a foul. And I mean, that's just, whenever you don't really have a whole lot to do defensively, because he's not really relied upon anymore defensively, he's able to do that. I want to say like 4 out of his 5 fouls were basically all on the offensive end.
I mean, he was playing in like almost every lineup that he was in. There was another big in, whether
exactly.
it be Maxi or Dwight. So he wasn't that sort of back line of defense, and he was able to freelance on some of their 3-and-D guys like Romeo Langford. And I definitely think that played dividends because he can defend those type of guys pretty well. I mean, he can even switch on to small sometimes. But like I said, I definitely think that it's been kind of the sort of call in terms of the optimization of how we could use him defensively. But otherwise, like he really catalyzed just the offensive flow in this one for the Mavericks, especially coming off the bench, and Jason Kidd's negligence to start him, things of that nature. I was really impressed. It was also kind of expected against just how slim that front line was that he'd have a big game once we saw that he was going to play after being listed as questionable. But I mean, he just did a good job, and every sense of the imagination of being able to stretch the floor, being a solid role man. Also, when the Mavericks got stuck, which they did a lot of times at offense tonight, he did a really good job just having to face up or attack the basket, drawing fouls on whatever lackluster center was guarding him. So I was very impressed with this game. And do you think that this is going to lead to him getting more minutes? This seems like a basically bi-weekly discussion we have, and I'm sure we'll obviously have it more in our other podcasts tonight with Jason Kidd and everything. But what do you think do you think Jason Kidd is going to divert to Christian Wood a little bit more? This is the first time, I mean, albeit the Mavericks heavily depleted, of course, but this is the first time that he's closed the game, played an overtime period or anything like that in a very long time, especially Jason Kidd actually, instilling that confidence in him with 5 fouls, I thought was very interesting. This is not, I know we have the excuses of the Mavericks, obviously we're not this injury depleted as of recently, but I was surprised by that. Do you think that this was a sort of one of those games, and especially one that he didn't look too bad defensively, and that might yield more minutes for him? Or do you think Jason Kidd will still be ever stubborn when Kyrie and Luka come back?
I mean, just the fact that Dwight Powell honestly had a pretty good game, I'm going to write this off and say he kind of just had to rely on him. Yes, he's a spark plug off the bench. Yes, he had a pretty good game in terms of that. But then again, I don't know. Now that you bring it up, I am a little surprised that, they did ride with him throughout most of that game, and especially overtime period. And yet he had 5 fouls throughout that whole entire overtime period. I felt like that was just a big step up coaching. I mean, congratulations to Jason Kidd actually making
we're making it's the small victories that matter in life, guys. I know, and here's the thing. I do want to bring up the sort of counter argument, because I do know all the anti-Christian Wood people out there, how he, his inclusion on this team is negligible, and all he does is, take away possessions from Kyrie when he's in there and things of that nature. And I mean, I would probably go along with the same narrative that I've been pushing for a long time. Yes, I am more on the pro Christian Wood agenda, but that doesn't mean I can't acknowledge the other side. I do get that the lineup data and most advanced metrics with the Dwight Powell and the on-off numbers all look, significantly better. And it's not a negligible sample size either, compared to Christian Wood in that starting lineup. But, I think if he's optimally used, especially as Maxi comes up to speed, I think one of the Mavericks' best lineups they could probably go to defensively is with Maxi at the 5 and Christian Wood at the 4. And I don't know if that's something they'll ever evolve into in terms of not ever being a starting lineup. I'm not asking for lone Christian Wood starting at the 5, or, I get Dwight Powell is a good spot starter at the 5, but I don't know. I just think that at the very least, even, I don't even want to bring up the starting discussion for that matter. I probably shouldn't even have went in that direction, but I do think that at the very least, even the anti-Wood people could acknowledge that he may warrant more minutes, because I don't think I just it's a hard argument for me to hear that he obstructs the flow of the offense so much that, he just takes away countless possessions from Luka and Kyrie. It even when he's out there in other games, it doesn't seem as Porzingis-esque as I think some of you guys make it out to be, because I know a lot of people have yielded or, gave KP as a pretty comparable guy to Wood in terms of how they feel like he has to find his offense and he's just taking away possessions. I feel like he can play within the flow of the offense. I mean, yes, there are times where he has to take a little bit more heat and he may have to do certain things a little bit more, when Kyrie and Luka aren't out there. But I don't know. I just think that the call to action for him to get more Kyrie and Luka minutes together just to see how that gels, that's not even something that they barely went to this season ever since they made the Kyrie trade. I don't know that. I just think that there's credence to the fact that it could still work offensively and defensively, so long as he's paired with another big man out there. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. Even if he's not starting, I still think he should at least be playing 25 minutes a game.
I mean, I agree with the minute margin. He should be playing 20 to 25 minutes at the very least, because this is a guy who is a starting caliber guy in the league. I think if you're going to stick him on a championship level roster, you can make arguments there if you're going to start him or not. But needless to say, the fact that he's not playing, and whenever he's not playing or whenever he is playing, he's playing a mere 15 minutes a game, especially whenever Luka and Kyrie are out there. It's kind of just embarrassing at times, because it's getting national attention at this point. Outside of that, hopefully Friday, I don't know whenever the timetable is for Kyrie return, but I would be interested to see a Kyrie or Luka lineup to see him in, because I really think in a one or the other lineup is where he's really effective. I'm in the boat where I wouldn't put him in with both. I just think that's just, I know this sounds, very basic, but that's just too many people on the court.
I guess to sort of counteract my point, if he's not the lone big with both of them out there, that sort of takes away some of the rolling aspect, and then you relegate him on offense to being a guy that kind of needs to find his shot a little bit more, as this sort of pseudo point forward. So yes. I do get that. But at the same time, if it might look good. I mean, you might want some other offensive creation from other spots, because even with Kyrie and Luka, we see them just get so doubled up at times and they seemingly have like no outlet. Even if Christian Wood's not acting as the lone big man in a lineup like that. So I don't know, that I see what you're saying there. Other than that, like most of his minutes do come typically in those non-Luka minutes at the beginning of the second and, at the end of the third and beginning of the fourth quarter with Kyrie. And I would just like to see them do a little more like direct action between each other, because it does seem like in those 15 minutes he's in there, they're not running like pick and rolls like they were with Luka early on the season. There's no sort of Spain pick and roll action. It's just a bunch of Kyrie ISOs. And then, Wood sometimes will be the benefactor of a drive and kick, or, if Kyrie takes a play off, they'll ask him to go try and find his own offense. And I just don't understand, especially in those lineups where he's only with one of Kyrie or only with one of Luka, and particularly for at a premium when he's the only big, why they won't do any more, what they won't divert to running any more pick and rolls or anything like that with him. That's kind of puzzled me. Just some more direct actions with him to optimize him a little more. I don't think he's as ball hoggish and as offense obtrusive as people make him out to be, but that's just my opinion. Otherwise, I think we'll talk more about him in the other podcast. What other guys do you want to highlight tonight? I think, this is a guy that we've sort of avoided getting to yet, but I think Reggie Bullock, I don't have much to say about him, but other than that, it was probably like his best game of the season. I think he's the one guy that had probably one of his better defensive performances of the season. He had that key stop down the stretch. He was just playing really good man-to-man defense in a game that sorely lacked defense from any other Maverick, and he was hitting all of his open shots that were giving to him. He was just doing a good job as a pacemaker and a veteran leader out there. You could see him kind of calling out rotations when Hardy missed one a few times. And I don't know, his defense is, and his output on that end has just increased seamlessly as we've gone throughout the season. It's just been the typical. It is typified the Reggie Bullock season where he just has positive regression on both sides of the floor throughout the season. And then we get to this point at the end of the season, contrary to the beginning of the season, where we were calling for this guy to get traded. And it's like, now it's like, oh shit, like this guy's one of the better 3-and-D players of the league. So I don't really have much else to add other than like, I hope he continues to keep this up. But, I would just like a little bit more consistency at the beginning of the year. I mean, I'm not saying he can play worse than he is now. Like, I'm not expecting 20 points, 6 to 10 3-point shooting every night. But I mean, if we can just at least get the defense at the beginning of the season, that'd make me happy. But I mean, he had a hell of a game tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I would tally this as really just the perfect Reggie Bullock game. I mean, he played high minutes, 46 minutes, efficient shooting, 13 rebounds. I think that was a career high, or at least
I didn't even mention that. He got 13 rebounds.
Yeah.
That's got to be up there in terms of the most he's ever gotten a game. I'll search it up as you continue to talk.
Yeah, and 2 steals, and one of those steals was really key late in game. I don't think it mattered in the grand scheme of things because it ended up going into overtime, but still, I mean, an incredible steal. But yeah, I think that this was just a perfect Reggie Bullock game in the sense that he didn't do anything, crazy that we come to, not see out of him, but everything that we expect to see out of Reggie is exactly what he did. And that's exactly what we saw. Great defense and great offense. And that offense comes in shooting. So yeah, I thought it was a good game.
And it was a career high in rebounds for him. And it was one off of his career high in minutes. He played 47 minutes earlier this year against the Lakers in that other overtime game. So, I mean, yeah, he played a hell of a game tonight. So, I mean, that covers all of the high, heavy dosage, the Mavericks having all those guys get 20 points tonight with the 5 guys. That was pretty quintessential to them winning the game. I feel like everybody else kind of just had a marginal impact on this game at best, but we can definitely gloss over them real quick. First off, I think the next guy that played the best after that group of 20-point scorers, and the only other guy in double figures tonight was probably McKinley right the fourth. Now his impact definitely waned a bit, and he, just kind of similar to Hardy in terms of how the game kept going along. You could definitely see that he just didn't have the, offensive wherewithal and toolbox to be maybe mentally to be able to deal with all that sort of stuff. But in terms of a guy that came in and provided like a good solid 20 minutes, he did a great job, I thought, pushing the pace and just sort of sifting through those pick and rolls and just acting as a sort of remediating factor for the Mavericks when things tended to get chaotic in that first and second quarter, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, this is a game where, off the bench, some offense was needed. He applied that. He did really well. He even had a pull-up 3 which looked like really clean. We don't get to see that a whole lot from his game.
He's been making a couple threes recently.
Yeah, he has been making a couple 3, and like this one, I don't know why, it just like looked really pretty. It was nobody came to pick him up, and he just threw it up and it went in. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely one where an efficient game out of him, especially facilitating the ball. Not nothing crazy defensively. He's just a good defending type guy.
It was definitely one of the worst defensive games.
I was like,
he's getting blown by a few times pretty handily. Yeah. And that's the one thing you can hope he can do is actually,
stick on his man. Yeah.
Stick on his man, because he's going to get shot over a lot given his size.
Yeah, exactly. I think he was like one of the main defenders on Trey Jones throughout this game. But yeah, he was definitely, man on man wise, he definitely got blown past a little bit, but team wise, I honestly think that he was one of the better guys throughout this game. But yeah, I just think, it was a really well all around game, or not all around, but really well offensive game from him, where he found his impacts, not forcing anything. It was all given to him. And I mean, I think it was one of the better games that probably won't get talked about enough throughout his career, but he's definitely finding a role. I think it's kind of cool. Like, we're seeing this guy's career kind of develop, where, he only played 4 games in Minnesota last year, and I don't know how many he's played this year suited up, but
I mean, it seems like he's passed up Frank in the rotation almost.
Yeah.
I guess it's game dependent, but
it's cool to see. But yeah, this is definitely one of his better games, I thought, throughout the season.
Yeah, no, definitely. What did you think about, I guess we'll throw these guys in together. What did you think about how Justin Holiday and Davis played tonight? I thought specifically for Justin Holiday, I mean, he just, he was moving around the arc, really just didn't get a ton of possessions to shoot. He went 0 for 1, and I thought he played good defense when he was in there. Other than that, though, I mean, he gave a good 12 minutes. I thought Davis actually rotationally played some decent defense tonight. He had like 2 blocks at the rim that were just kind of him being savvy. I mean, yeah, he got bodied a couple times. There was like one time where Keldon Johnson just took him to the basket essentially. But like as a team defender, he's actually, he fills in the gaps as much as he can. Then he came in and made a few threes. I thought he actually gave the Mavericks a little bit of a boost in that fourth quarter there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's weird saying this, but I thought Davis Bertans had one of the better games, at least on the roster this year or this game. He definitely had one of the better ones, but even defensively, it's weird saying this. He honestly had for his sake, a pretty good defensive game. One where nothing stuck out other than those 2 blocks, but individually did everything he needed to do. Didn't look like a sore thumb other than 1 or 2 possessions throughout this game, but it didn't seem like, San Antonio was targeting him as much where, if we're having to rely on this, Friday against the Lakers, maybe they're going to direct to driving on him more compared to this game. But even still, he's able to find his impacts defensively and offensively. We know he can do. That's exactly what he did. He went 50% from the 3-point line, 2 for 4, and knocking down basically 2 movement shots where, he's like one of the only guys in the league that can really, at that speed, make those shots. I want to say he had one just sort of like very quick shot. I don't know, he just kind of threw it up there, but it went in. But yeah, a good Davis Bertans game. Justin Holiday, good defensive game, kind of just pacing and getting cardio on the offensive side of things. Yeah, outside of that, I thought that Davis had a good game, and Justin Holiday, I mean, defensively good, but again, offensively, I already said what I said. So
yeah, exactly. What did you think about how Maxi played tonight, barring the, just mental breakdown there at the end? I don't think, I think he was a solid, fortifier on that back end, but at the same time, he was obviously having to switch a lot more tonight, I think, than he usually does because just how much the Mavericks were getting blown by in this game. But I don't know. I didn't think it was his best defensive game. There were some times where, Blake Wesley, like Keldon Johnson, there were some times that he kind of got took to the rim a little bit on, but he also, didn't just look like a complete black hole on that end. And offensively, he just really didn't have the opportunity to find his shot a whole lot. He made like 1 corner 3 off a broken possession, but they weren't going to him that too much. He attacked Gorgie Zhang off a closeout, and I kind of felt sad because Maxi's legs just did not look there. And it was like at the end of the third quarter, I think he just got it swatted into like the second row. So I think he's still kind of just getting his jolt back. Coming off that injury, he doesn't look as athletically inclined, and we can see it offensively and defensively. But I mean, he's still, barring the end, of course, where it's just a complete mental breakdown. I thought, he still looks like an okay role player out there at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, this was one where defense was at a premium, and I didn't think he gave the best effort, just throughout the game. Yes, he's still getting his feet under him after that hamstring injury, but even still, I don't know. I liked what you included though, where like his athletic ability is just kind of it's being shown at times, and especially whenever he did get blocked by Gorgie Dang, like that was one where you're like, okay, this guy has seen better days, and hopefully he will see better days. But definitely, in terms of Maxi, I don't think it was one of his better games. We've seen better games throughout him, and honestly, for a pretty level-headed start, or not start, but since coming back to injury, he's honestly played pretty good. And this is probably, I would tally as maybe the worst one he's played.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I think the end in itself has to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he's still coming back into form, so I'm not going to, tally this up and be like, okay, this is horrible, he should get his minutes reduced. But definitely his worst game since coming back from injury.
No, I completely concur. JaVale got a little bit of a run there in that second quarter, which was surprising. Jason Kidd, I don't think has played him since the Kings game. I know there's been some calls to just see what he has as the Mavericks big man situation just completely dissipates over these last few weeks. But I mean, I didn't really think he played too terrible. I thought he played solid defensively in his few minutes in there. He obviously was daring Gorgie Zhang to shoot every single possession. He let him have like 3 wide open threes, but other than that, I mean, I think he did a good job rebounding and did a good job in the roll scenarios. He had 4 quick points. He made 2 free throws and then got like an offensive putback, but he picked up 2 quick fouls and he never saw the floor again. Do you think we should see more JaVale minutes or a little bit at least, Jaren, as we
I
approach the
mean,
playoffs?
I'm not gonna lie, in these spurts where he's playing like these 4 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever it is, like he looks really well. But anytime he gets past like 5 minutes,
Yeah.
it's like too much.
Yeah.
So I think in what role he's given, it's like pretty fine.
Yeah, I think where I'm at is if Maxi's woes continue into the playoffs, and let's say 12 games from now, Maxi is still where he's at now, I think there may need to be a serious discussion about JaVale getting like actual minutes at that point. But barring that, I just don't know whatever he's giving you defensively is worth it enough to, play over Christian Wood or Dwight Powell or even Maxi at times. Is there any guys from the Spurs that you wanted to, highlight? Obviously they got a lot of just, young creators. I mean, obviously Devontae Graham coming over in that trade, he had a solid impact on the game tonight, making 4 threes. He had that 1 4-point play. They just got a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things, with Malachi Branham, he's that spark plug guy off the bench. Then they got some 3-and-D guys that are sort of these pseudo creators, and like Blake Wesley, and then Trey Jones is really quick guard. I mean, they got some talented young players despite all the injuries and everything tonight. I just wanted to see if there was any guys you wanted to highlight specifically. I think the Mavericks should have still fortified their defense better than they did, but nonetheless, like I'm not going to act like they were just going up against a ton of bums on the other end. The Spurs do have some talented players, despite them definitely being, probably one of the worst rosters in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an understatement to make. But Keldon Johnson had his usual game, just being dominant pretty much. I think everyone who's suited up and could played for the Spurs, if I'm right. But yeah, I mean, I know that you put a tweet out earlier today where it was like Blake Wesley's about to put 40 on us just due to the roster, but he ended up with only 11. Outside of that, I don't think I have anything else. I thought, Keldon Johnson looked really good. He always proves against the Mavericks to be a really good player. And again, I mean, Devontae Graham, he hit some timely threes.
Yeah, no, 100%. But other than that, we'll catch you guys in the next one. We have another podcast coming out right after this. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at mainstream_Mavs. If you guys are listening on podcasts or Apple, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to follow us and give us a 5-star rating if you so please. If you are listening on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. We will catch you guys after the Lakers game, and we will be back for another podcast tonight talking about the state of the team and how the Mavericks fare in the Grizzlies games.